He thought walking away would solve everything, but he had no idea what awaited him. The quiet riverside village stood frozen in time, dinner plates still warm, chairs pushed back as if everyone had vanished mid-meal. Early morning mist curled over tents, abandoned gear, and footprints leading nowhere. Police arrived to search the campsite, uncovering the first clues: a lone leather wallet, a partially open backpack, a smartphone still powered on, and scattered personal items. Each discovery raised more questions than answers. Will these fragments of evidence finally reveal what happened? Or is the truth still hidden, waiting to strike again? Stay tuned as investigators follow the trail, because every object tells a story, and some secrets refuse to stay buried.
The river town had always been small. Barely 50 houses nestled between the slow bend of the water and the dense wall of forest that rose like a living barricade on the other side, and though travelers passed it on their way to larger towns or the nearby dam, no one expected it to be remarkable. Until the morning when a fisherman in a battered aluminum boat drifted to the dock and stepped onto the planks only to realize that not a single voice greeted him. Not a single dog barked, not a single curtain shifted. And when he made his way into the village proper, his boots crunching on gravel, he saw open doors, steaming coffee cups, a half-played card game by the window, a rocking chair still swaying as though someone had just vacated it, and in one house a table lay for supper with roasted chicken, potatoes, green beans, everything cooling but still recent, the candles half-burned, chairs pulled back, as if the family had simply risen and left mid-bite. And though he shouted, banged on doors, searched the riverside for signs of children playing or men chopping wood, there was only the river, sluggish and gray in the morning light, the whisper of pines, and the eerie hum of silence that seemed to swallow his voice. By noon the county sheriff had arrived, a heavy-set man with a lined face and the sort of eyes that had seen his share of drunks and domestic disputes, but not something like this. And as his deputies fanned out through the neat rows of homes, they found the same unsettling details repeated again and again: half-drunk glasses of milk, laundry mid-fold, a radio still playing static, a truck idling until it ran out of fuel, and in one case, a baby's crib with a mobile still spinning slowly above it. Though the infant was gone without a trace, and each house was the same, as if every inhabitant had been called out by an unseen signal and vanished into the trees. They called in search parties, dogs, drones, even helicopters that beat low over the river and circled the woods. But there were no tracks, no signs of struggle, not even a misplaced shoe, and when they checked the pier, they saw 3 fishing rods propped neatly against the rail, lines in the water, bait still glistening on hooks, but no fishermen in sight. The sheriff, already unnerved, called the state police, and by evening the village was crawling with uniforms, volunteers, and media vans, the latter already speculating about cult activity, a chemical spill, or some new disaster, though the first responders knew better. This was no evacuation, no panic-driven flight, because panic leaves debris, trails, footprints, but here everything was orderly, precise, and that made it worse. The detective assigned by the state was a woman in her 40s, sharp-eyed and restless, who had once lost a brother in a hunting accident and carried that ache like a private scar. And though she didn't show it to her colleagues, she felt a throb of dread as she moved through each immaculate home, taking in the still warm plates and neatly folded coats by the door, and wondered if the people had known, in those last moments, that something was coming for them. She ordered forensics to collect everything, from the fingerprints on the glasses to the phones left charging by bedsides. But the strangest thing was that the phones had no recent calls after a certain hour, as though the network itself had cut them off, and the landlines yielded nothing but dead air, as if the town had been isolated by some invisible hand. As darkness fell over the river, the rescue crews lit lanterns and floodlights, casting stark beams over the empty porches, and the detective gathered her team in the small community hall to piece together what they knew, but all they had were questions. Where could nearly 100 people have gone without leaving a trail? Why had they left food cooking? Why had no one called for help? And why did every watch and clock in the homes seem to have stopped at the same time? 9:17 p.m., as if the entire village had frozen in a single moment before vanishing. The sheriff swore under his breath. Some deputies crossed themselves, and the detective, though skeptical of superstition, felt the hairs rise on her arms when she realized that the stop clocks were not coincidence, but a message of some kind, a marker left behind. She requested backup from federal agents, insisting that this was not just a missing persons case, but something larger. And though some mocked her for overreacting, she couldn't shake the certainty that whatever had happened here was not natural, not accidental, and the longer they delayed, the colder the trail would become. At midnight, while officers combed the woods with flashlights and dogs whined at the edge of the tree line, refusing to enter, the detective returned to the fisherman who had first raised the alarm and pressed him for details. Had he seen anything on the river, heard anything unusual, smelled anything strange? The man, pale and shaking, swore that as he approached the dock that morning, he thought he heard singing, low, rhythmic, like many voices humming the same note. But it stopped the moment he tied his boat, leaving only silence, and though it might have been wind in the trees, he had lived by that river all his life and knew the difference. She wrote it down, but her pen trembled. Then one of the deputies burst in, face ashen, clutching something wrapped in a blanket. When he pulled it open, the room fell silent, for inside was a single leather-bound book, damp from the riverbank, its pages filled with names, the names of every villager, each crossed out with precise ink lines, except for one, the last name at the bottom, left uncrossed. And though the detective did not recognize the name, the sheriff did, muttering that it belonged to a woman who had moved away 10 years ago, long before this night of disappearance, and no one knew where she lived now. The detective stared at the uncrossed name, her pulse pounding, and asked aloud the question that now gripped them all. Why was she spared, and what did it mean for the rest? The morning after the discovery of the leather-bound book, the village seemed even more haunted than before. Fog crept across the river, thick and wet, curling around the tree line like tendrils searching for the lost, and the detective led a growing team of searchers along the muddy banks and narrow lanes, their boots squelching in the wet earth, dogs straining against leashes, ears alert, noses twitching for any hint of human presence. But the only sounds were the river's slow churn, the distant caw of crows perched high on skeletal branches, and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot that sent hearts hammering in anticipation of a sign, any sign of life. Helicopters thumped overhead, rotors slicing the air into rhythmic pulses that reverberated against the jagged cliffs beyond, and from those heights, the detective scanned the empty streets with binoculars, noting every detail. The open shutters, the chairs pulled back from tables, the toys scattered in yards as though children had disappeared mid-play, and she felt the weight of isolation pressing against her chest, the way the forest seemed to hold its breath, watching, waiting. Volunteers fanned out into the surrounding woods, calling names in trembling voices, their shouts bouncing back as echoes that only heightened the unnerving emptiness, and yet some found traces that did not belong to the villagers. Footprints that were too small or too large, prints that began or ended abruptly without a connection to a known path, crushed ferns that suggested a careful passage, and glints of metal that could have been dropped in a struggle but revealed nothing when examined closely. Among the debris left behind, a half-empty bottle of whiskey, a child's jacket snagged on a branch, a single boot by the river's edge, the detective began to notice patterns that seemed deliberate, a sequence in the chaos, and she ordered the evidence cataloged meticulously, knowing that in these details lay the first hints of understanding. As the day wore on, the searchers became exhausted, faces streaked with mud and sweat, but even fatigue did not diminish the tension. The wind carried strange sounds, snaps and rustles that were never accompanied by sight, whispers among the trees that could have been imagination or warnings, and the detectives' team discovered a trail of recently disturbed soil along a hidden path behind the old mill, where wild raspberries grew unchecked. The soil dark, wet, and soft, suggesting recent passage, and although it led deeper into the forest, the track vanished abruptly at a narrow ravine, leaving only a sense of foreboding, as though the woods themselves had swallowed the path hole. A drone deployed to hover over the river bends and treetops picked up a faint glimmer in the water near the downstream bend, and when a small crew investigated by boat, they found a partially submerged backpack, slick with mud and algae, its contents missing save for a single photograph of the villagers standing together in front of the general store, smiling and unaware that they would soon vanish, and tucked behind the photo, a scrap of paper with coordinates scribbled hastily in pencil. A sequence that led to no known property or landmark, and the detective felt a chill as she traced the numbers on a map, realizing that the location was miles upriver, in the heart of an uninhabited forest that was both dangerous and nearly inaccessible. Meanwhile, the sheriff dealt with the mounting pressure of media and the public, reporters demanding answers, theorists suggesting supernatural causes or secret experiments, and the villagers' relatives arriving in waves, faces pale, eyes wide with disbelief, offering conflicting accounts of the missing, sometimes claiming sightings or strange events in the days leading to the disappearance. Yet their testimonies only tangled the narrative further. Inside one abandoned home, the detective found a journal, bound in soft leather and smelling faintly of smoke, its pages filled with neat, meticulous handwriting. The entries mundane at first, weather, chores, dinners, children's moods, but gradually, over the last weeks, the entries became erratic. Notes about unfamiliar figures seen in the woods, strange lights on the river at night. Items moved in the home without explanation. A growing sense of unease punctuated by the phrase repeated in margins, they watch, they wait, and the river answers. The handwriting changed near the final pages, jagged and hurried, trailing off mid-sentence, a note ending with the word leads, leaving the detective to wonder what had been intended. As they processed this new evidence, a second drone discovered a pattern of footprints along the frozen mud near the north bend, a sequence that indicated multiple individuals moving in tandem, some barefoot, some in boots, some dragging objects that sank into the wet earth, and yet none of these footprints matched the villagers' sizes or shoe types, raising questions about whether outsiders had been involved, and if so, why the villagers had not reacted, had not screamed or fled differently, as any normal human would. Late that evening, as the fog thickened again and lights flickered over the river, the detective received a call from one of the forensic analysts. The partially submerged backpack had fingerprints, but none matched the village registry. The scrap of paper with coordinates had smudges suggesting haste or deliberate obscuring, and the photograph, under enhanced analysis, revealed an anomaly, a shadow of a figure standing just beyond the villagers, blurred and half-hidden, appearing in each print of the photograph in a different place, suggesting movement during the moment the picture was taken, or perhaps a manipulation, and the detective realized that this might be the first glimpse of the orchestrator, someone behind the disappearance, watching, planning, present yet invisible. Tension mounted among the searchers as the night deepened. A volunteer tripped over a root in the dense underbrush, dropping a flashlight that rolled into the river, the splash echoing like an alarm, and, in the darkness, the whine of an animal, unidentifiable, froze them in place, ears straining, hearts hammering, the detective signaling silence, knowing the smallest noise could alert whatever had taken the villagers or could simply be the forest playing tricks on their minds. She instructed small teams to follow the coordinates while others combed the perimeter, hoping for overlooked trails, and during a tense hike up a steep ridge, one of the volunteers discovered a shallow pit, carefully concealed beneath fallen leaves, containing remnants of campfires, trampled grass, and a metal container with vials. Clear liquid with no labels, smell faintly chemical, enough to send a ripple of fear through the team, for it suggested not just abandonment, but planning, a calculated effort, and a willingness to use substances that could incapacitate or control, and though they handled it cautiously, the implications were staggering. Someone had prepared for the villagers' disappearance long before the last night. Someone knew the terrain intimately. Exhausted, the teams regrouped near the river, and as the first pale light of dawn touched the fog, they found the first body. Not one of the villagers, but a lone man, splayed unnaturally on the bank, his face pale, eyes wide with shock, and clutched in his hand a half-burned note with only a single phrase visible. "They are taken, but the river keeps them safe for now." A chilling message that forced the detective to confront the possibility of a deliberate, meticulous abduction executed with precision, leaving no immediate trace, and yet with a purpose beyond simple malice. By midday, they discovered the first abandoned boat upstream, tied loosely to a tree, oars missing, the interior stained with footprints but no blood, no struggle, no sign of violence, and tucked under a bench, a second scrap of paper with coordinates different from the first, leading to a small clearing deep in the forest, where the tree line was almost impenetrable. The detective's mind raced. Were these waypoints, traps, or clues left deliberately by the orchestrator or by the villagers themselves in a desperate attempt to leave a trail? As helicopters circled above and fog rolled thick over the river, obscuring the banks, a local hiker emerged from the trees, pale, shaking, reporting that he had glimpsed movement among the branches. A group of figures, moving methodically, almost too synchronized to be natural, disappearing when he tried to call for help, leaving only the sound of rustling leaves and the occasional snap of a branch. The detective, heart pounding, traced the path reported by the hiker, only to find another abandoned house, doors open, tables set for breakfast, again, the smell of coffee lingering, and on the kitchen counter, a digital camera turned on its side, screen cracked but powered, containing footage of the night the villagers vanished, shadows flitting through the rooms, objects moving as if guided by invisible hands, and in one frame, a figure standing in the doorway, face obscured by a hood. Motionless, yet commanding attention, a silent puppeteer in the theater of disappearance. She called for immediate review of all footage, while deputies set up perimeters and volunteers scouted higher ground. And as dusk fell again, bringing with it the deep velvet darkness of the river fog, the detective stared at the footage, replaying the same frames over and over, the realization settling in that the village had been taken systematically, deliberately, leaving behind an empty stage, and that each clue, coordinates, vials, abandoned vehicles, the photograph anomalies, the journal entries, pointed not to chaos but to a calculated design, a labyrinth of mysteries she had only begun to navigate. Exhaustion pressed on the team, nerves frayed, yet every new discovery spurred them onward. Another scrap of paper found in a hollow tree with cryptic numbers, a faint smell of smoke in the underbrush where no fire had burned, footprints leading to nowhere, and the chilling sense that whatever force had removed the villagers was still present, watching their every move. By midnight, when search parties regrouped for a final sweep, a sudden scream echoed from the far end of the village, sharp and human, breaking the oppressive quiet. The teams converged, only to find the source gone. A single flashlight rolling gently in the dirt, the batteries dead, leaving the detective staring into the blackness with a sinking certainty that the next clue, the next revelation, would bring her closer not just to understanding what had happened, but to confronting whoever, or whatever, had orchestrated this disappearance. And as she traced her finger along the coordinates on the map once more, she whispered to herself, what were they trying to show us? While the river, gray and slow, carried secrets that no one could yet see. By the fourth morning after the disappearance, The detective had begun to sense that the carefully constructed narrative of the empty village was only the surface of something far more complex. Despite meticulous cataloging of footprints, photographs, and the journals, the evidence seemed to lead in conflicting directions, and as she pored over maps, tracing coordinates that sent teams into dense, unmarked woods, abandoned cabins, and river bends no villager had ever mentioned, she realized that much of the initial search had been wasted, focused on paths that the perpetrators, or the villagers themselves, had anticipated, a misdirection so subtle it could only have been planned by someone intimately familiar with the terrain. Volunteers, exhausted and frustrated, voiced complaints about dead ends and wasted efforts. Tensions rising among deputies and search parties as the detective explained, repeatedly, that there was a pattern to the chaos, that each seemingly random clue, the half-burned notes, the footprints of mismatched sizes, the vials of chemical substances, was part of a deliberately choreographed disappearance. And yet, even with that understanding, no one could predict the next move. No one could confirm whether they were following the missing villagers or merely the shadow of whoever had orchestrated their vanishing. An analyst pointed out that the initial timeline had gaps. The last power usage in the village had been earlier than expected. Some cars had left the grid completely, and a few cameras along the river recorded nothing but static for hours before the disappearance, as if someone had cut communication selectively, leaving only the illusion of normalcy. And this revelation shifted the detective's focus from the natural landscape to the human factor, the possibility that the village had been surveilled and manipulated, that someone had planned the extraction with a precision that could rival military operations, and that the villagers' routine lives had been observed for weeks, maybe months. As teams retraced steps through the woods based on new interpretations of the coordinates, the detective began to question the credibility of the journals. The handwriting, neat and methodical at first, had sections with sudden flourishes, ink variations, and coded sequences of letters that suggested hidden messages, warnings perhaps, or instructions meant to be interpreted only under certain conditions. And she brought in a linguistics expert to examine the entries, hoping to decipher a pattern that could reveal the villagers' intentions or their awareness of impending danger. Meanwhile, the first theories about outsider involvement were complicated by witness statements collected in neighboring towns. A hiker reported seeing a solitary figure moving upstream with a small backpack several nights before the disappearance. And a fisherman swore he noticed lantern lights flashing in the trees at odd intervals. Yet these accounts were inconsistent, sometimes contradictory, creating a fog of human error layered over the mystery of the vanishing. And the detective realized that she could not rely solely on physical evidence, that human memory itself had become a variable in the investigation. At one of the clearing points marked by previous coordinate discoveries, the teams unearthed another backpack, this one heavily waterlogged, containing a torn journal, half of its pages missing, and a digital recorder with a single audio file, distorted and faint, in which the voices of villagers could be heard talking hurriedly, overlapping, speaking in clipped sentences that implied urgency, fear, and plans that seemed to contradict the diary entries. And though the audio was indecipherable, in parts, one phrase repeated clearly, "Follow the river. Don't stop. They watch." And the detective felt the weight of urgency and dread as she realized that the villagers might have been aware of being observed, perhaps even trying to escape a measured, orchestrated capture, which made the disappearance all the more sinister. On the same day, the team found a series of markings on trees, scratches, symbols carved into the bark, almost imperceptible unless one knew what to look for, forming a trail not only through the forest but over steep, dangerous ravines and along slippery riverbanks, suggesting a path chosen deliberately to confuse or deter pursuers. And when compared with the coordinates from previous discoveries, the patterns matched, forming a web of clues that could either lead them to the missing or into traps and the detective knew that proceeding without caution could be fatal. Internal conflicts intensified as deputies began questioning the allocation of resources. Some wanted to focus on the coordinates leading to the deep forest, while others believed the trail had gone cold, arguing that the villagers were long gone or even dead. Yet the detective insisted on following every lead, her own past loss of a sibling fueling an obsession with bringing the missing to safety, or at least uncovering the truth, a compulsion that put her at odds with colleagues. And as tensions flared, one of the volunteers, a former park ranger familiar with the cliffs, pointed out that the initial assumptions about the villagers' capabilities were flawed. Some of the missing were experienced with wilderness navigation, meaning they could have left deliberate false trails or known how to survive in hidden shelters, introducing the possibility that they had taken matters into their own hands. But if so, why leave everything else behind so meticulously? The detective revisited the partially submerged backpack recovered days earlier, this time with a forensic team examining water damage and residue. The contents had traces of an unknown chemical compound, faint enough to be missed initially, that could induce drowsiness or confusion, and the same compound was detected in small, near-invisible vials scattered in the shallow pit found upstream, confirming suspicions that whoever had orchestrated the disappearance was prepared to neutralize resistance, a horrifying level of forethought that made the forest itself feel like a trap. As they combed the riverbanks, searchers discovered a small hut, hidden behind thick underbrush, its exterior camouflaged by moss and vines. Inside, a makeshift stove, still warm, footprints on the floor, and a collection of notes written in a hurried, desperate hand. Directions, coordinates, warnings, and fragments of a journal discovered in the village, suggesting someone had tried to continue a trail, or perhaps leave breadcrumbs, a map to salvation, or clues to a final location. And the detective stared at the pages, realizing that the clues did not merely document a path, but communicated intention, purpose, and perhaps even fear of discovery. The day stretched into night with fog rolling over the river, and the soundscape of the forest shifted. Hoots of owls, the drip of condensation from branches, the snap of distant branches, all amplified by the thickening darkness, while a new element emerged. Electronic interference, static on radios, short bursts of signal loss on drones, even GPS devices registering brief malfunctions, as though the environment itself had been manipulated or as though someone was actively monitoring the searchers' movements. Amidst this, another clue surfaced. A small, nondescript truck parked at the edge of the clearing, engine cold, interior empty, yet in the glove compartment a map marked with the villagers' houses, their positions, and paths connecting them with strange symbols, circles, arrows, and X's that did not correspond to any known trails, leading to speculation that the disappearance had been meticulously mapped, rehearsed, and perhaps even observed in real time by an unseen orchestrator. And a detective felt a knot tighten in her chest as she considered that each step forward might have been anticipated, each action tracked, each discovery controlled. By midnight, when teams regrouped to rest briefly, a radio transmission came through from the northern perimeter. One of the volunteers, a young woman, reporting movement among the trees, figures appearing to follow the searchers' paths, retreating when approached, impossible to identify in the fog, yet their presence undeniable, footprints appearing in the mud in a pattern that seemed too precise to be accidental, and a discarded flashlight at the edge of the clearing that had been functioning. Minutes before was shattered in two, lying silent, a stark warning that someone or something was watching, orchestrating, and if provoked, capable of violence. The detective, eyes scanning the dark forest beyond the floodlights, considered the implications. The villagers might have been taken by outsiders with intimate knowledge of the terrain, or perhaps some members had cooperated, willingly or unwillingly, leaving the others behind. The journal, the backpacks, the notes, the audio files, all were breadcrumbs leading to something larger, something deliberate. And yet she could not discern the full picture, only fragments, as if the forest itself held secrets the human mind was not meant to fully grasp. Exhausted, she returned to the clearing hut, staring at the maps, the symbols, and the coordinates, tracing paths with a trembling finger, aware that time was slipping, that with each hour the trail grew colder, and that the orchestrator was likely still nearby, watching the searcher's every move, leaving small, unnerving messages, a test of resolve or a psychological trap designed to unnerve and manipulate. The night air grew colder, the river whispering in its slow, relentless way, and in that oppressive silence, the detective realized the scale of the challenge. Every previous assumption, every theory, every expectation had been called into question. The investigation had shifted from a straightforward search into a battle of wits with an invisible adversary. And the only certainty was that the villagers were not simply missing. They had vanished according to a design, and the forest, the river, and the empty village were only the beginning of a puzzle she had no idea how to solve. As she laid out the latest maps, the scattered journals, the photographs, and the coordinates, a subtle vibration in her earpiece caught her attention. A faint, distorted signal, repeating intermittently, almost like a whisper through static, and when she isolated it, she recognized a pattern. Numbers repeated 3 times, matching no known location, but hinting at a site deeper within the forest, one not yet explored. Treacherous and possibly the heart of the disappearance. And as the detective stared at the coordinates, heart pounding, she realized that the next step could reveal not only the fate of the villagers, but also the identity of the orchestrator, the invisible hand that had emptied a town overnight. And the question that now consumed her, louder than any sound in the fog, was singular and pressing. Who had planned this? And why had they left a trail that might lead her straight to them? The next morning broke with a gray light that barely penetrated the thick mist clinging to the riverbanks, the air damp and heavy with the scent of wet earth and pine, and the detective, having barely slept, gathered her core team to follow the new set of coordinates derived from the distorted signal recovered the previous night. A path leading into a dense thicket of firs and moss-covered boulders where no human presence had been recorded for decades. Each step was a negotiation with the uneven ground, roots twisting like serpents underfoot, mud sucking at boots, and the distant rush of the river a constant, relentless reminder of the isolation that cloaked this wilderness. As they pressed deeper, the forest seemed to respond to their intrusion, branches snapping above like warning gestures, shadows shifting with the morning fog, and the detective could feel an almost tangible tension pressing down, a sensation that every movement was being monitored by unseen eyes, the stillness punctuated only by the occasional call of a raven or the drip of condensation from thick branches. After hours of careful progression, they came across a small clearing, previously overlooked due to its deceptive appearance of natural formation. But upon closer inspection, they noticed subtle signs of human activity, flattened areas in the underbrush, remnants of a small fire long since extinguished, and carefully arranged stones forming a rough path leading to a hollow beneath a rock outcrop. Here, the detective made a chilling realization. This was no ordinary campsite. It bore the hallmarks of concealment, a deliberate attempt to hide something from casual discovery, and she ordered the team to proceed with extreme caution. As they moved closer, the hollow revealed its secret. Inside, partially concealed beneath a layer of moss and branches, were several personal items belonging to the missing villagers. Clothing, a child's toy, a worn photograph of a family, and a journal that had not been recorded in the previous search, the pages intact, their edges frayed but legible, each word a testament to fear, strategy, and survival. The detective carefully examined the journal, recognizing in its entries a narrative that contradicted everything the search teams had assumed. The villagers had been aware of someone tracking them, perhaps even anticipating the search, and had documented their movements, their choices, the small victories and setbacks, and hints at a confrontation with an unknown party, someone with intimate knowledge of the village, its routines, and its inhabitants. Each passage suggested not desperation alone, but strategy. They had prepared traps, false trails, and hidden caches, indicating a level of foresight that was unsettling in its sophistication, and it became clear that whoever had orchestrated the disappearance had been planning it for months, perhaps years, using the villagers' knowledge of their own environment against them. As the detective continued to scan the clearing, her eyes caught something half-buried near the edge. A small, metallic case, corroded but intact, and inside it were coordinates mapped on a hand-drawn chart, cryptic symbols matching the ones found in the village and on the torn journal pages, along with a USB drive that appeared to contain digital recordings, photographs, and files that could illuminate the events leading to the village's sudden evacuation. The discovery electrified the team. Adrenaline surged as they realized they had found the heart of the mystery, the key to understanding what had initially seemed impossible. Back at the clearing, forensic experts began processing the items, using portable scanners and computers to analyze the data, while the detective reviewed the journal entries, noting dates, times, and peculiar references to environmental conditions and the behavior of the villagers, which hinted at manipulation from an external force, possibly someone who had observed them over months and knew precisely how to provoke, control, or mislead. As hours passed, the team unearthed additional items hidden under loose soil and tree roots. Small vials containing residues of chemical compounds, maps annotated with cryptic warnings, and a radio device, partially damaged but functional, which when powered, emitted faint, coded transmissions that the detective suspected were used to monitor the villagers' movements or communicate instructions, confirming her worst fears that this was not merely a disappearance caused by fear or accident, but a deliberate, coordinated extraction. The detective's mind raced with possibilities. The orchestrator might be a local with detailed knowledge of the terrain, someone connected to the village, or an outsider with advanced surveillance capabilities, and the meticulous arrangement of clues suggested a game, a psychological manipulation designed to control both the villagers and the search teams. Meanwhile, emotional tension among the team escalated. Volunteers, some of whom had personal connections to the missing, were overwhelmed by the evidence of premeditation. The thought that their friends or family members had been hunted and herded like prey into an intricate trap, and the detective had to manage panic, grief, and anger while maintaining focus on the mission, knowing that any misstep could jeopardize the fragile trail that remained. As they cataloged the items, the detective noticed one particular entry in the journal, a hastily drawn map of the village showing secret passageways, hidden alcoves, and an underground chamber beneath one of the abandoned houses, with a note: "If you read this, follow the river, but beware of the shadow." The phrasing was ambiguous, yet the detective could feel the weight of urgency, a message perhaps intended for someone within the search team, or a warning to the villagers themselves, and she decided that the underground chamber might hold critical evidence or even survivors. Gathering a small team, they navigated the treacherous path indicated in the journal, wading through cold, fast-flowing streams, climbing over slick moss-covered rocks, and using ropes to descend a steep embankment, each movement deliberate and cautious. When they finally arrived at the site, the entrance was partially obscured by fallen trees and vines, but a small, carefully concealed hatch allowed access to a narrow. The following dawn was pale and colorless, the fog hugging the river like a living shroud, and the detective, fueled by the previous day's revelations, gathered her core team to follow the latest coordinates transmitted in that cryptic radio signal, a path leading far deeper into the wilderness, along narrow ridges, through mud-slick ravines and overfallen trees. Each step in negotiation with the uneven terrain that threatened to topple or trap them at any moment, and yet, despite exhaustion and mounting tension, a determination gripped them. The villagers' fate, or at least the truth, awaited at the end of this treacherous trail. Hours into the arduous journey, the team came across remnants of human activity, carefully concealed supplies, footprints partially washed away by rain, and improvised signals etched into trees that matched the patterns discovered earlier, reinforcing the idea that the villagers were either guiding the search deliberately or had left a coded trail to outwit whoever had orchestrated their initial disappearance. The detective's mind raced with possibilities, considering whether the villagers themselves were complicit in misleading searchers, or whether an unseen antagonist had planned a layered extraction that included leaving false clues to manipulate the investigation. As they moved along a narrow riverside path, a sudden discovery brought the team to a halt. A small clearing with signs of struggle, scorched ground, overturned containers, and a set of tracks that suggested more than one person had been involved, some leading deeper into the forest, others circling back toward the river, hinting at an intricate dance of pursuit and evasion. And the detective felt the familiar tightening of anxiety as she considered the orchestrator's sophistication. The sheer audacity of manipulating not only the villagers but now the search team itself. As the team examined the scene, one of the forensic analysts discovered a partially submerged digital device, a tablet coated in mud but still functional, containing GPS coordinates, photographs, and a series of encrypted messages, some in plain text, others in a code matching symbols from the villagers' journals, revealing not only locations previously unknown, but instructions, warnings, and surveillance logs, chronicling movements of both the villagers and unidentified observers. And for the first time, a pattern emerged, suggesting a network of hidden caches scattered over miles, each containing items critical to understanding the disappearance, and possibly tools to guide the searchers closer to the truth or into traps. The emotional toll on the team was immense. Volunteers with personal connections to the missing were visibly shaken, some faltering under the weight of the evidence, while the detective maintained a relentless focus, aware that hesitation could jeopardize progress, and she reminded herself that every clue, every sign, every scrap of evidence brought them closer to resolution. Even as the forest itself seemed to resist understanding, its shadows deepening, its sounds amplifying the unease that hung in the air. They pressed on, navigating a labyrinth of river bends, overgrown trails, and rocky outcroppings, until they reached a concealed valley, a place of unsettling calm, where the trees arched like cathedral ceilings and the mist swirled around broken branches. And here, at last, the first clear human structure presented itself. A small cabin, abandoned but clearly inhabited until very recently, with footprints leading to a hidden cellar and faint smoke traces suggesting that someone had been there. Within hours, not days, and the detective realized that the orchestrator, or the villagers themselves, had used the cabin as a staging point, a hub from which to coordinate movement, concealment, and communication, and the stakes suddenly became visceral, immediate. Inside the cabin, evidence revealed startling new details. Maps annotated with the villagers' homes, paths, and hidden caches, notes warning of tracking devices and surveillance methods, photographs of masked figures observing the town from elevated positions, and a hastily scrawled message on a table. Trust no one outside the circle. They watch. Follow the river to the last marker, a line that confirmed the detective's suspicion of a deliberate, controlled manipulation, a psychological maze designed to disorient and divide those who sought the truth. As they explored further, one of the team members uncovered a partially blocked hatch leading into an underground chamber. The detective insisted on descending, knowing that the chamber could hold the key to understanding the disappearance. Inside, they discovered a meticulously organized cache, containers of preserved food, water, first aid supplies, and notes detailing the villagers' escape plan, including a list of who had gone where, what paths had been used to mislead observers, and the timing of each movement. Digital devices contained GPS logs, photographs, and messages that painted a clearer picture of the orchestrator's involvement, suggesting not just an outsider, but possibly someone with intimate knowledge of the villagers' routines, resources, and vulnerabilities, and the detective could feel the weight of revelation pressing down, the clarity mingling with the dread of confronting the unknown adversary. As the chamber was cataloged, the team noticed subtle signs that someone else had been there recently. A footprint in soft soil, a recently extinguished candle, a faint hum of electricity from an unseen device, and a discarded vial similar to those found earlier, indicating that the orchestrator, or an accomplice, was still active, moving ahead of the search team. leaving traces calculated to provoke fear, guide movement, and manipulate perception. And the detective understood that while they were closing in on the truth, they were also playing into the hands of a strategist who anticipated every decision. The tension reached a climax when, following the underground trail, they emerged onto the riverbank to witness a scene that made hearts pound. A partially loaded boat, supplies ready for immediate departure, and evidence that someone had evacuated the villagers along a hidden channel, unseen by conventional search efforts. Beside it, a small, concealed crate contained a recording device, its last file playing a faint, distorted message. If you are here, you are close. Continue. But be wary, they are not finished with the game. A chilling confirmation that the orchestrator had monitored their progress, guiding them toward a controlled revelation, a psychological crescendo designed to manipulate the searcher's emotions and understanding. As they scanned the surrounding forest, shadows moved among the trees, figures darting between trunks, only glimpsed peripherally, reinforcing the detective's suspicion that the orchestrator had eyes everywhere, using the environment to control the pace, the perception, and the morale of those following the trail, and she knew that confronting them directly could provoke danger. Yet as the first pale light of dawn brushed the river valley, the detective and her team moved cautiously toward the hidden enclave. Every step weighted with anticipation, fear, and the accumulated knowledge of days of pursuit, knowing that the culmination of the investigation, the answers to why an entire village had vanished overnight, hung in the balance. The mist clung stubbornly to the riverbanks, swirling around the trees and rocks, making familiar shapes alien and every sound amplified in the damp silence. Yet the detective's focus sharpened, noting subtle signs of recent activity, footprints leading to the cabins, faint smoke spiraling from chimneys, and the distant ripple of water that betrayed movement along the river. The team split strategically, advancing along natural cover, the detective carrying the weight of every discovery, from the journals, hidden chambers, encrypted devices, chemical vials, to the meticulously staged paths and false signals, each piece now converging toward a tangible goal. The villagers and the orchestrator, whoever they were, now within reach. As they reached the first cabin, the detective's heart pounded, not from exertion, but from the realization that they were moments away from uncovering truths that had eluded them for so long. Inside, the cabins revealed clear signs of recent occupation. Personal items belonging to the villagers, food and water untouched, notes left carefully for anyone following the trail, indicating that the villagers had chosen their concealment deliberately, a protective strategy rather than mere abduction, and that the orchestrator's manipulations had been psychological, designed to make searchers question their own assumptions, fears, and interpretations. Suddenly, from the ridge above, a figure emerged, silhouetted against the rising sun, and the detective recognized immediately that this was the orchestrator, a person whose knowledge of the village, its routines, and the searcher's behaviors suggested intimate familiarity. Someone local, yet cunningly hidden, whose motives were now about to be confronted. The team froze, tension so thick it felt almost tangible. Every member aware that a single misstep could ignite violence. Yet the detective took a steadying breath, recalling every clue, every subtle misdirection, every journal entry that hinted at fear, trust, and survival, and began to approach with cautious authority. The figure, initially still, finally spoke, a voice calm, measured, yet laced with the weight of secrets held too long, admitting to orchestrating the staged disappearance not out of malice, but to protect the villagers from a threat they could not have faced openly, a combination of criminal opportunists and corrupt officials seeking to exploit the town's isolation for personal gain. The orchestrator explained how they had guided the villagers to concealed locations along the river, maintained coded communications, and created false leads to confuse anyone who might stumble upon their protective strategy, revealing an unexpected complexity. The disappearance was simultaneously a rescue, a deception, and a test of trust for both the villagers and the investigators. As the detective absorbed the confession, the villagers began to emerge cautiously from the cabins, faces pale, eyes wide with fear and relief, children clinging to parents, elders scanning the approaching team with a mix of curiosity and residual wariness. Conversations unfolded in hushed tones, explaining how weeks of careful planning had allowed them to avoid detection, how coded signals, hidden caches, and clandestine movements had preserved their safety, and how the orchestrator had balanced the risk of exposure against the immediate threat, each decision a moral compromise intended to protect life. The emotional weight on the detective was immense. Every moment of doubt, every misstep in the search, every trace of misdirection now converged into an overwhelming clarity. This was not a story of violence or abduction, but of fear, foresight, and human cunning deployed for protection. And yet, the psychological scars were evident. Villagers trembled, parents whispered anxiously, and the detective could feel the impact of weeks of tension, manipulation, and uncertainty on every individual present. Coordinating with local authorities, the detective ensured that the villagers' safety was maintained while arranging for proper documentation of evidence, digital files, journals, and physical artifacts, all to be analyzed and preserved, not as a record of a crime, but as a testament to the extraordinary circumstances the orchestration of a disappearance meant to shield rather than harm. And as the first helicopters arrived to transport supplies and support, the detective reflected on the enormous logistical feat that had kept the villagers hidden, secure, and yet psychologically tested by the careful orchestration of each stage of concealment. As the day progressed, interviews were conducted, recordings analyzed, and a clearer picture emerged. The orchestrator had been aware of both external threats and internal vulnerabilities, manipulating circumstances to protect the most vulnerable, to confound those who might unintentionally compromise the villager's safety. And the detective realized that the boundary between moral right and strategic deception was delicate, nuanced, and deeply human, each choice layered with ethical ambiguity. Fear and courage, a reminder that in the wilds of isolation, human ingenuity could be both salvation and manipulation. Slowly, as evening approached, the villagers began to reintegrate, cautiously exploring the riverbank, inspecting the cabins, and reclaiming fragments of normalcy, while the detective debriefed her team, highlighting both the meticulous work and the unforeseen psychological complexity, acknowledging that the mystery had been far greater than the sum of vanished people. It had been a study of fear, survival, trust, and orchestrated protection in a hostile environment, a story where danger had been evaded not by chance, but by human foresight and strategic concealment. As night fell over the river, a final meeting with the orchestrator allowed the detective to secure full disclosure. Locations of hidden caches, detailed movements, encoded communications, and evidence of threats had all been revealed, providing closure and understanding, yet leaving lingering questions about the extent of planning, the ethical lines crossed, and the sacrifices made. A poignant reflection on human decision-making under extreme circumstances. In the final moments, the detective stood on a riverbank, the mist curling around her boots, the water reflecting stars obscured intermittently by clouds, contemplating the layers of fear, ingenuity, and morality that had defined the past weeks, recognizing the resilience of both the villagers and those committed to uncovering truth, and as she watched the orchestrator fade into